Today we continue our fall sermon series entitled Call to Adventure to the Promised Land. We'll follow the journey God's people make from Egypt to the Promised Land. The children of Israel model the journey of adventure we're called to as well. Following in their footsteps, we'll discover lessons for traveling together as a community of faith. We're invited to accompany these forefathers and foremothers as we walk alongside them to be transformed, encouraged, and challenged. They are our traveling companions, and under their guidance and direction, we will find new blessings as we sojourn together. Let us continue. As a reminder of where we have been and where we are traveling, here is Dan Harmon's story circle. This structure frames our series. Starting clockwise at the top, a character is in a comfort zone, but they want something. They enter an unfamiliar situation and adapt to it. They get what they want, but pay a heavy price. They return to familiar situation, but they have changed. We began our journey in a place of comfort, complacency, and slavery. Our want for something more, better, different, and new placed our feet on the threshold of something greater. That something greater required we step off the threshold and go into uncharted territory, a place of adventure, mystery, surprise, and wonder. Last week, we ended our message with these questions. Who are we without our chains? What is our identity outside of captivity? Who are we when we're no longer tethered to this threshold? What is our personality when we're no longer in slavery? These questions we're engaging today as we enter stage 4, adapting to unfamiliar territories. With the waters of the Red Sea behind us, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could shake our tambourine with Miriam and dance our way into the Promised Land? As momentous as it is to stand on wilderness soil outside of Egypt, getting here wasn't a single act. It's not as if Ramses, the city of Israel's captivity, is on the shoreline of the Red Sea. In order to get to the wilderness and adapt, there's a series of goings that Israel must first undergo. They go from Ramses to Succoth, that's near the Egyptian border. They go from Succoth to Etham, on the edge of the wilderness. They go from Etham to Pi Hahiroth, a channel opening near the Red Sea. A series of goings through known territory brings us to the point of no return before crossing into adaptive territory. God gives Israel a trial run of sorts in known territory before they get to the wilderness. They get to practice being a people on the move. It's after they pass through the Red Sea and they're on the other side that the training wheels come off. Crossing the Red Sea on dry ground between two walls of water is a sign of their commitment and willingness to enter into transformation. Leaving their known world and old selves behind, crossing the point of no return. By passing through these depths, they demonstrated they're all in, and which is cause for rejoicing, as Miriam and others do. Wouldn't it be wonderful if after the waters had subsided, that the old selves of these former slaves were also buried under the sea. With their feet on the sand of the opposite shore, Israel stands on a new threshold, the wilderness, where adaptation is essential to survive. Paraphrasing Joseph Campbell, upon which Harmon bases his story circle, this stage is a series of tests, trials, and ordeals that Israel must undergo to begin transforming. Frequently, they fail one or more of these tests, which often occur in threes. This is a time of high anxiety and deep questioning of identity. Anyone that has entered unfamiliar territory, whether first day of driving, first day of college, first day on the job, first date, wedding day, birth of first child, death of first parent, or first serious medical diagnosis will attest it's a time of high anxiety and deep questioning of identity. What happens once these newly liberated children of Abraham find themselves 3 days in the wilderness? They complained against Moses, quarreled with Moses, and were almost ready to stone him. Why? Because they're hungry and thirsty. We shouldn't be too hard on them. For after all, they left Egypt in such a hurry. They only took unleavened dough with them and had no time to prepare provisions. You can't eat the clothing, silver and gold plundered from the Egyptians. But they didn't just say, "I'm thirsty," or "I'm hungry." It's the nature of their complaint and quality of their quarrel that's problematic. We're told they had a strong craving and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt for free. The cucumbers, melons, onions, garlic, and leeks. In Egypt, we used to sit by the pots of meat and eat our fill of bread. And there's nothing at all but this manna to look at." Fish for free? Don't they remember their slavery? Pots of meat? Don't they remember the shackles on their feet? There's nothing at all but this manna to look at. They have some nerve. They receive bread from heaven, and all they do is look down upon it. A strong craving has set their minds to raving. They've been liberated. But all Moses gets is berated. How is it they're eyewitnesses to signs and wonders? Not one, not two, but 10 plagues. Pillars of cloud and fire. The Red Sea split in two, walking through it on dry ground, and all they can do is grumble, "Our strength is dried up." They're moving forward through the wilderness, but part of them is still in Egypt. Unfamiliar territories make folks apprehensive. In times of stress and anxiety, we default to behaviors like grumbling that keep us stuck. Here's an unsettling question in hopes of movement. Where have I been freed, but I'm still grumbling? Israel's hunger and thirst is a trial they must undergo to begin transforming. We'll see if they fail one or more of these tests. Why is Israel having such a hard time with their liberation? Why such grumbling, quarreling, and complaining? A lifetime of slavery and strong cravings distorts memory and delays transformation. And it wasn't just one lifetime that experienced such oppression. It was a systematic subjugation for 400 years across 36 generations. They had groaned under their slavery, and they were groaning under their freedom. It is one thing to get out of Egypt. It's an entirely different thing to get Egypt out of us. African-American author and womanist Audre Lorde wrote, "The true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations that we seek to escape, but that peace of the oppressor which is planted deep within each of us." Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire noted, "The oppressed, having internalized the image of the oppressor and adopted his guidelines, are fearful of freedom." Egypt worked tirelessly to overwrite Israel's original identity and occupation to become things useful to empire. Israel's original identity was a child of God. For as Hosea 11:1 says, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." Their original occupation coming into Egypt was, guess what? This is where you get to guess. Original occupation of Joseph and his brothers coming into Egypt. Not slaves, shepherds. Just like their ancestors, as Joseph instructs his brothers to tell Pharaoh when they're asked. Do we recall what kind of work a later Pharaoh forced them to do? Bricks, mortar and brick to build cities, and field labor, working on farms in the Nile Delta. Pharaoh tried to overwrite their child of God identity to become things, slaves. That's on the complete opposite end of identity for Israel. Pharaoh tried to overwrite their occupation of shepherds to become brick makers, construction workers, and field hands. That's on the complete opposite end of occupation for Israel. Think about it. Shepherds wander, find oases, the next grassy meadow, and set up tents wherever the flocks may go. Slaves are confined, make bricks, weed grass from fields, and live in mud brick dwellings their entire lives. Shepherds are nomadic. Slaves are stationary. And in order for Israel to adapt in the wilderness, they're going to have to reclaim not only their original identity, but also their original occupation. The anxiety from deprivation of food and water causes them to revert to former occupational identities. With a little imagination, consider these fanciful scenarios after Moses strikes the rock of Horeb and water starts flowing. He comes back 3 days later and is surprised by the buzz of activity around the river. He meets the first guy who's stooped over, pressing something down. Moses asks, "What are you doing?" "Oh, hey, Moses, it's me, Ben. I'm with the International Union of Bricklayers. Me and some of my former crew in Egypt were thinking, gee, it'd be a shame for all this water to go to waste. So we took out the brick molds we'd packed in our stuff. Because you never know when you'll need a brick mold. And would you believe the mud here is even better than in Egypt? Must be that miracle water. And with the desert straw all around, these bricks practically make themselves. And you'll be getting the first house." "First house?" Moses asked. "Sure, you're our leader. Of course you'll get the first house. And Tom over there has surveyed and platted this area to house the rest of the 600,000. Moses walks on a bit further downstream and sees a woman dipping her finger regularly in the soil. He asks, "What are you doing?" "Oh, hey, Moses, it's me, Becky. I'm with the United Farm Workers. And, me and some of my former field mates were thinking it would be a shame for all this water to go to waste. So we fetched the farm tools we packed in our stuff, because a hoe can double as a walking stick. We dug canals, created an irrigation system, and would you believe the seeds we planted are already sprouting? Must be that miracle water. Here's the row of cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic, just like home. Pretty soon, we'll have a bumper crop." Perhaps a bit fanciful, but not off the mark. Moses tells people to only gather as much manna as they need each day, and not to leave any leftovers for the morning. Some don't listen, and it breeds worms and becomes foul. Anxiety over scarcity is the only reality in captivity. Hoarding becomes a way of life. Because slaves subsist on rations, stockpiling scraps for tomorrow, makes sense. A lifetime of craving, a lifetime of slavery and strong cravings distorts memory and delays transformation. Israel was having a hard time with their liberation. Would it surprise anyone that Israel failed not one, not two, but 3 of their tests in the wilderness? They failed the test of thirst. Although God had already changed bitter water to sweet at Marah, and already guided them to Elim with 12 springs of water. They failed the test of hunger because Elim also had 70 palm trees. They complained about meat even after God provided manna. Their bodies were in the wilderness, but their minds were still in Egypt. As it took an act of God to get Israel out of Egypt, so it takes an act of God to get Egypt out of us. A question: where does God need to get Egypt out of me? Walter Brueggemann's Journey to the Common Good says that those living in anxious fear of scarcity have no energy for the common good. Only by fleeing to the wilderness can Israel escape Pharaoh's anxiety system of scarcity, the death grip of an Egypto-American system of fear, anxiety, and greed. Requires God's immense generosity to shift the focus from ourselves onto caring for others. God's grace of water from the rock, quail 3 feet deep, and daily bread from heaven redefines the wilderness as a place of unexpected abundance. Here's a question: where do I need God's abundance to redefine a wilderness in me? God's miraculous provision breaks the anxiety that creates fear, anger, aggression, and violence. Such abundance is not for hoarding, but discovering whether one gathered much or little, one always had enough. Imagine being in such a place. How freeing would that be? At the table, we imagine and enact a meal of such abundance, itself based on that first Passover, echoed in manna and quail, bread and fish, water from a rock, and water into wine. By adapting to abundance, we receive not only the gifts themselves, but prepare ourselves to receive the giver. If you thought manna was something, wait till we get to the mountain. If you thought quail was something, wait till we feel the quaking. If you thought a trickling brook was something, wait till we hear the trumpet blast. This is not an adventure you want to miss. Stay tuned. Amen. If you're ready to follow the pillar of fire and cloud and be transformed, we'd welcome you forward as we sing, "All Who Hunger Gather Gladly." Please stand as you're able.